After hearing Klein's and Fry's guesses, Leonard tugged on his collar and paced about, saying, "Then we have to investigate everyone in the workhouse who came into contact with Salas, as well as everyone he came across after he went bankrupt and was chased out of the house. It's very troublesome indeed. Time is of the essence. Let's split up and do a cursory check here, then head to the third reported death in the West Borough and leave the rest to the police." "All right," Klein answered without hesitation. Fry didn't have any objections. He turned towards the people who had been sleeping near Salas last night. Klein was about to find someone to question when he suddenly saw Leonard shooting looks at him. He was motioning at the side hall of the workhouse with his chin. What does he want? Klein was a little lost. He acted as though nothing had happened and strolled around the hall, then followed Leonard into the side hall while Fry was distracted. They made their way through the partition to a silent corner which had no one else around. "I have a hypothesis," Leonard suddenly said, stopping in front of a shattered window. Klein looked around in confusion. "What's your hypothesis?" Leonard, with his deep green eyes, he returned the question. "If there were no supernatural factors, what do you think Mrs. Lawwise's outcome would have been?" Klein thought for a moment, then said solemnly, "The same, just delayed by a week or two, perhaps a month. But to a family like theirs, they would have only seen the doctor when she really was at her limit. As long as her heart problems turned for the worse, there would be no way for her to be saved." "Then what about Salas? If he hadn't been instigated by someone, what kind of end would he have?" Leonard asked again. Klein pondered and said, "From the description and the information, Salas was already very angry about his bankruptcy, and was furious that no one saved him. I think that he would have exacted his vengeance sooner or later, but not at the people at the workhouse. He might have targeted the boss that made him bankrupt or the staff of the bank that seized his house." "What would the result of his revenge be?" Leonard pressed on. Without a doubt, he had already decided to end his life. He would have died no matter what the result of his revenge was. Klein gave an affirmative answer. Leonard nodded and revealed his signature flippant smile. "Then can we conclude that Mrs. Lawwise and Salas were both people fated to die soon?" Klein was a knowledgeable keyboard warrior. Upon hearing the question, he immediately had a guess. "You're saying that their deaths were moved forward by some supernatural factors. But why?" "A more accurate description would be, their life force had been shortened by some supernatural factor. It was stolen, and life force is the best material when it comes to summoning evil gods and devils or conducting terrifying curses." Leonard smiled as he corrected Klein's guess. "Summoning evil gods and devils or conducting terrifying curses." Klein looked into Leonard's emerald eyes and said, half in doubt, "You seem to be very sure of this. But, for the time being, our investigation sample is only at 2. Leonard laughed cynically. "Klein, there's no need for any pretense between us. I saw you break free from the control of sealed artifact 2-049, and I know that you're special. And you should be able to sense that I'm a little different from the average beyonder." His smile disappeared as he looked into Klein's eyes. "I've told you that there are many special people in this world that can always do things others can't, such as you and me. This world has a long history. There are many magical items that people wish to obtain, to control. They wish to become the stars of their own show. There aren't many people like that, but it's impossible that there are only 1 or 2 of them. I don't think that a beyonder with his or her secrets is a bad person or an evil thug. I don't think that we even need to be clear on where their special abilities come from, and what they represent as long as your actions are not endangering me, the Netorks, or Tingen City. Then you're still my partner. Similarly, I hope that you'll look at me with the same attitude. Of course, it's best not to speak of this to the higher-ups. Those Fodgies are old-fashioned and conservative, always thinking that special people like us will definitely lose control, definitely feel the pull and temptation of the evil gods or devils. But I have more secrets than you can ever imagine," Klein thought to himself. He said frankly, "I share the same sentiments as you. I only look at your actions and your motives, and don't care about how special you are. I will also try not to probe into your secrets." After saying this, he added in his heart, "No, actually I do mind and am very curious, but I'm putting up with it for now." Leonard thinks that he is the star of their show. What kind of encounters did he have, and what kind of magical items does he possess? Leonard unfastened the buttons of his shirt and nodded with a chuckle. "I'm glad that we have this understanding. In action novels, this is called the meeting of 2 protagonists. The wheels of history are set in motion." How shameless. Klein gave a perfunctory smile. He knew that the phrase, "wheels of history are set in motion," came from the Emperor Lascelles. Leonard paced around quickly, his green eyes brightened as he curled the corners of his mouth. "All right, I'll be honest. I'm quite confident that the victims of these deaths would have died within the next 3 months, but their deaths have been brought forward to the past 2 weeks by someone, through some means. The other party's motive should be to summon evil gods or devils, or conduct a terrifying, large-scale curse. It is easy for the culprit to hide their murders, given that their victims already showed signs that they were going to die soon. This wouldn't attract the attention of the police department, or be disrupted by the Netorks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive in mind during the culprit's preparatory phase." Klein muttered to himself and analyzed the culprit's thought process. Leonard smiled and agreed, "That's right. If 3 healthy, normal people were to suddenly drop dead, it would definitely attract attention and bring about an investigation. Then how are we going to find the author used for the ritual? Regardless of whether the culprit wants to summon an evil god, devil, or conduct a terrible curse, he or she would need a sacrificial altar, a ritual. The harvested life force would also have to be stored in a similar place." Klein chose to believe in Leonard, for he didn't have any other clues and was unable to make any other deductions. "It doesn't hurt to try." Leonard laughed and said, Klein, isn't that within your professional domain? Can't you imagine what is happening around an altar like that? Without waiting for Klein to answer, Leonard described a thick aura of death with the altar at the center. There wouldn't be any living things other than the person conducting the ritual in a 10-meter radius. The surrounding temperature would be at least 5 degrees lower than the average temperature, with a cold wind blowing past it continuously, and the stolen life force of Mrs. Lawwise and the rest will remain within the altar, sealed by a wall of spirituality. Having said that, he looked at Klein and teased, I think that you would be able to divine roughly where an altar with the following qualities would be. Klein frowned slightly and replied solemnly, as long as it's within Tingen City. Furthermore, I would need a quiet place where I wouldn't be disturbed. My house, for example. I would also need the personal belongings of Mrs. Lawwise and the rest, as well. Klein's heart also skipped a beat. He felt that Leonard was a little too knowledgeable in the dark arts. No problem, Leonard laughed. He suddenly stepped past Klein and walked toward the hall, not saying anything more. That man sure has a unique style, Klein cursed in his heart and followed. When Leonard found Fry seriously taking notes, he put on a serious tone and said, I have a hypothesis, and was hoping that Klein would give it a try. What hypothesis? Fry asked, appearing cold. I'll tell you if there is a result. I don't want to be laughed at by Roseanne and the rest. Leonard gave a whimsical excuse and changed the subject. Fry didn't ask any further. He acted according to the instructions and obtained Salis's and Mrs. Lawwise's personal belongings from the nearby police station, then met his partners at Klein's house. Wait in the living room and don't let anybody disturb me. Klein took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. It was about 6 now. Melissa might come back at any time. You can trust us. Leonard put his hands on his hips and paced around the living room. Fry sat silently on the sofa. Does Leonard have ADHD? Klein pouted and went to his room on the 2nd floor. He locked the door and sealed the room with a wall of spirituality. After which, he set up an altar and asked for the help of the goddess, eliminating any disturbances. Then, Klein wrote a divination statement on a piece of paper. The position of the altar. He gave a sweeping statement to prevent himself from missing out on any information. Grabbing the piece of paper and the belongings of the dead, Klein laid down on his bed. He first recalled the scene Leonard described, then silently recited the statement 7 times. He didn't try using the world of fog, firstly, because that weird and mysterious Leonard was downstairs. Who knew if he would notice something weird about the ritual? Secondly, his seer potion was about to be completely digested. It was likely that the aid of the ritual was sufficient for the success of his divination. Klein would only consider finding an opportunity to enter the world of fog if he didn't get a result. After all, the summoning of an evil god or devil was something that could threaten Benson, militia, and himself. With the help of cogitation, he quickly entered the dream and saw a hazy, illusory, fragmented scene. Soon after, an image floated before his eyes. It was a 2-story greyish-blue house bathed in a sunset glow. The windows of the 1st floor were shut tight and the dark curtains had no gaps. However, they expanded and contracted from time to time. The soil around the house was dark brown, but nothing was growing in it. The garden around the house seemed to be covered in shadows, dilapidated, and dark. There was a river flowing silently near the house. Some time later, Klein exited the dream, having not seen anything else. Leonard's hypothesis was correct. Where could that building be? There are too many rivers in Tingen City, such as the West Borough, Southwest Borough, the harbour area, the university area. He opened his eyes and rubbed his temples as he thought. His expression serious. 2 Daffodil Street. Inside the living room that was painted with the luster of dusk. Klein stood in front of the oriel window as he told Fry and Leonard. My divination revealed something. I saw a greyish-blue 2-story building in my dream. The windows on the 1st floor were all shut tight, and the curtains were drawn. It's surrounded by a few meters of brown soil without any greenery or flowers. It also has a terribly gloomy garden, just like the kind you find in a horror story. The only characteristic that can be used to identify it is a nearby river, a slightly broad river. It might be the Tussock River or Koi River. We could only find out through process of elimination. Hopefully we can still make it in time. The Tussock River was the biggest river in the Lowen Kingdom, coming down from the northwest where the Miminsk mountain was. It flowed towards the southeast, passing by the Mid-Seasha, our county, and then passing through the capital, Backland, and into the sea near Pritz Harbour. The locations where it converged in Tingen City included the southwest corner of the West Borough and the harbour in the South Borough. The source of the Koi River came from the northern York Mountain as it passed through the University District in the East Borough and locally merged with the Tussock River. Those were the 2 main rivers around Tingen. The rest could only be considered streams, and none of them had an expansive water surface. Upon hearing Klein's description, the pale and cold Fry nodded lightly in agreement. Since there were no other clues, process of elimination was the only efficient method. Just then, Leonard smiled and said, perhaps we can narrow down the possible locations of the target. How do we narrow down the possibilities? Klein frowned and asked in reply as he looked at the silver vine leaf pocket watch. Leonard chuckled. A criminal with a plan and a goal would select targets somewhere far away from the location of his altar. This is a result of their natural instinct to be safe. Only when there aren't many soon-to-be dead people left in the areas far from his altar would he consider them near targets. So, we should read through the information again, exclude the areas where the number of death incidents rose rapidly above average standards. Klein's eyes lit up when he heard that. Brilliant conjecture. At the same time, he sighed inwardly, I really don't have the talent to be a detective. Fry nodded and picked up the documents on the coffee table and started reading it again. After a few minutes, he deepened his hoarse voice and said, "There really is such a region, and there's only one possibility." "Which area?" Klein asked. Fry passed the thick stack of information to Leonard, who was next to him. He pursed his thin lips and said, "Westborough." "It's the Westborough?" Klein clenched his fist and immediately suggested, "Then let's search the southwestern area of Westborough. That area isn't huge." "I agree," Leonard echoed as he waved the papers in his hands in agreement, as though he wasn't the one who suggested narrowing down the scope of their search. The two-wheeled carriage slowly drove along the muddy road. Beside them, the red and orange glow of the sunset reflected off of the broad river that was colored with the twilight radiance of the sunset. Klein and Fry looked out the windows from both sides of the carriage, inspecting one house after another. They were searching for a greyish-blue house with a dilapidated garden. If possible, they would take note if the curtains on the first floor was drawn. Leonard leisurely sat in his original spot, leaning against the wall of the carriage as he hummed a popular local tune. The dim scenery flew past, and Klein caught sight of the greyish-blue two-story building from the corner of his eye. In front of the building was a gloomy garden that appeared in ruins. "Found it," Klein said while suppressing his voice. Before he finished his sentence, Fry and Leonard squeezed over to look out the window. There was almost no space between them. As the carriage drew closer to the building, the dark curtains that were drawn on the first floor appeared before the three in the Cork's eyes. Klein didn't even need to divine whether they had the right building. He was completely certain that it was the building that he saw in his dream. That was where the evil altar was set up. None of them stopped the carriage, but instead allowed the carriage driver to continue driving forward. They passed their target and continued away from it, as though they were just passing by. When they could no longer see the building when they turned around, Leonard told the driver to stop the carriage. "Klein, return to Joutland Street in this carriage and tell the captain to come here for assistance." Leonard snapped his fingers and smirked at his teammate. Is he thinking of me as a rookie and that I shouldn't be involved in such a dangerous mission? This fellow is still quite a nice guy. Klein was stunned as he realized what Leonard meant. Fry nodded in agreement. "You just started combat training and your job is a support role." "I know, and a person who could kill so many in order to hold a ritual won't be an easy opponent. Only the captain could make this situation less terrifying." Klein took a breath and agreed rationally. He looked at Leonard, then at Fry before forcing a smile and said, "Be careful." "Don't worry, I cherish my life a lot. Until the captain arrives, we'll only keep watch, and we won't get close." Leonard smiled. Fry didn't say anything but only picked up his suitcase. Klein was quiet for a while. He then took out a copper penny and said, "Let me divine once for you." He chanted, "What will happen here will lead to a good outcome." He flipped the coin at the same time his eyes turned dark. Dang. The coin flipped into the air, then landed firmly in Klein's palm. Klein looked and saw it was the king's head. He immediately let out a breath of relief. "It's only a blurry symbol, so there are other interpretations. The most important thing is to be careful and prudent at all times," he explained to Fry and Leonard like a seer would do. Leonard had already turned around. He waved and jumped off the carriage. "As naggy as my 80-year-old grandma." Fry nodded seriously and got off with his suitcase. Watching both his teammates head towards the target building, Klein touched the revolver in his armpit holster and told the driver, "Joutland Street." The driver, who had been hired by the hour, didn't object but allowed the horses to continue the journey. 36 Joutland Street. When Klein entered the Blackthorn Security Company, Roseanne, Mrs. Oriana, and the others had already gotten off work. It was unusually quiet and dim. Dunn was sitting on the sofa in the guest area. The gas lamp was unlit, and he seemed to blend into the darkness in his black windbreaker. "Found any clues?" Klein, who was searching for the captain, was given a shock by Dunn's deep voice. Klein quickly turned around and looked into Dunn's grey eyes as he said, "Yes, we..." He quickly told him about Leonard's bold hypothesis, his confirmation via divination, and the subsequent discovery of the house. As for Leonard's confidence and the uniqueness that Leonard had discussed, they were unimportant and obviously not worth mentioning. Dunn cut in from time to time. When the briefing ended, he abruptly stood up and walked towards the door. When he was almost down the stairs, he turned around and said, "I almost forgot. You stay here just in case there are any emergencies here." "All right," Klein nodded solemnly. At that very moment, other than Kenley, who was on duty guarding Kinner's gate, the other Nitorks were busy in the field. Dunsmith ran down a few steps and suddenly stopped. As he put on his hat, he shouted at Klein through the door, "Lock the door and follow me. Hey, we won't need you to join the battle. First, you can get a sense of the atmosphere, and second, we might require the assistance of ritualistic magic during the final search or inspection. Remember, until everything is over, you have to be at least 50 meters away. You cannot get close to the building." Klein was stunned and nodded firmly. All right. The sun sank beneath the horizon, and the surging Tussock River turned eerie and dark. Dark clouds obscured the crimson moon, making the greyish-blue two-story building look like a monster hidden in the shadows. The garden before the building was extremely quiet. It was as though it didn't have any insects, nor any other forms of life. Klein looked at the scene from a distance, his palms sweating and his body shivering. He felt that there were countless terrifying things hidden, waiting, and hungry for a bloody feast. He watched Dunn, Leonard, and Fry move carefully towards the target building, blending into the darkness. On the second floor of the greyish-blue building, in the bedroom without any lights, a gentle and sweet young maiden with a round face was seated before her dressing table, looking carefully at her face after the complicated skin-care routine she had just completed. There was a silver mirror next to her right hand, its surface coarsely ground, almost unable to reflect a figure. Suddenly, a stream of blood seeped out from the mirror. The expression of the gentle and sweet-looking Trissy suddenly grew grave. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out in silence. Vines grew all over the dilapidated garden outside the glass windows. The river flowed softly, reflecting the stars in the sky as warm glow suffused out of the nearby buildings. Everything was silent, as if awaiting the arrival of night. Trissy, who had ordinary features which combined to make her look surprisingly beautiful, retracted her gaze and walked quickly towards the clothes rack to retrieve a long black robe fitted with a hood. She quickly put the robe on, fastened the buttons and belt before pulling the hood over her head, transforming herself into an assassin. Trissy raised her right hand and swiped her face, immediately turning her appearance under the hood blurry. Right on the heels of that, she grabbed a handful of shimmering powder from the hidden pouch near her waist and scattered it over herself while reciting an incantation. Trissy's figure started to disappear bit by bit, her outline vanishing like how pencil marks were being erased by an eraser. She silently left the bedroom after completing her concealment spell. She moved to the opposite room and then opened the non-grilled window. With a light leap, Trissy stood on the window sill and looked over the grassy plains to the back of the building. She looked down at the steel fence that had seemingly fused with the night. There, she saw Corpse Collector Fry, who was silently making his way over the fence. She took in a deep breath and fluttered down like a feather, stepping onto the grassy field without a sound. Fry, who was wearing a black windbreaker, cautiously surveyed the surroundings with his custom revolver in his hand, seeking out vengeful spirits or evil spirits that might appear. He could see such entities directly. Trissy approached Fry silently, made her way behind him. It was unknown when a dagger smeared with black paint appeared in her hand. Puff. She struck quickly, plunging the dagger into Fry's lower back. But at this moment, the scene in front of her shattered, as if everything was an illusion. Trissy realized that she was still standing on the windowsill, still looking over the grassy field and the steel fence. Except this time around, it wasn't only Corpse Collector Fry who was standing outside the fence. There was also Leonard Mitcher, who was aiming straight at the windowsill, as well as Dun Smith. The captain of the Nighthawks was hunched over as he pressed down on his glabella, his eyes closed as formless ripples spread outwards from him. Trissy's pupils constricted. She understood that everything that had happened was just a dream. She had fallen asleep unknowingly. Bang! 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 Leonard and Fry fired 3 shots, accurately hitting the invisible target who was still waking up from her reverie. Crack! Trissy's figure started to appear, first cracking, then completely shattering into fragments of a rough silver mirror. Inside the building, Trissy, who had used the substitution spell, turned around to escape. She followed the corridor and the steps, sprinting all the way to the first floor. Whoosh! A cold, sinister wind blew across the first floor, one that could freeze a person. Formless, transparent figures were numbly pacing around every corner of the building in her daze. Trissy, who had lost her concealment, felt her temperature drop every time she passed through the spirits. She could no longer control her shivers when she finally reached the sacrificial altar. The altar was a round table, with a figurine of a deity carved out of bone placed in the center. This figurine was about the size of a grown man's head, with only a mere indication of her eyes, but the figure was that of a beautiful woman. Her hair extended from her head to her heels, each strand clear and thick, as if they were poisonous snakes or tentacles. There was only one eye situated at the tip of every strand of hair, some closed, others open. There were many puppets strewn around the figurine. The craftsmanship of the puppets was crude. Names and relevant information were written on the puppets. For example, Joyce Mayer. There were 3 candles on the table, flickering with a yellowish-green flame despite the cold, sinister winds. Trissy bowed at the deity's figurine and quickly recited her incantations. She then pushed away the puppets and extinguished the flames of the candles before picking the figurine up. Whoosh! The winds howled fiercely as they shook the closed windows violently. Clank, creak, shards of glass flew around in all directions. Fry, who had just made his way to the other side of the building, didn't dare to barge into the sacrificial altar recklessly. He shivered, feeling his blood turn cold and frosty. It was making his actions visibly slower. Suddenly, he felt tightness around his heels as though they had been grabbed by something invisible. An accentuated sense of coldness spread upwards from the point of contact. A sequence 9 beyond would have turned completely numb by now. But as a corpse collector, Fry was no stranger to such situations. He turned his revolver to the side of his heels and pulled the trigger. It was as if he could see who the enemy was, and exactly where it was. Bang! A silver demon hunting bullet pierced the air, causing a shrill howl in response. The formless figure dissipated and Fry regained his ability to move. Elsewhere, Dun Smith, who wanted to reach the second floor by avoiding a frontal assault on the altar, was similarly affected by the cold winds. His body froze as he stopped right outside a shattered window. Whoosh! The curtains behind the window lifted suddenly and engulfed Dun, as if a monster had just opened its mouth to devour its prey. The curtain wrapped around Dun's head, seeming to have been imbued with life. Dun's facial features began to press through the constricting cloth. Dun, who was about to be suffocated, stomped down with both feet. He straightened his knees and twisted his waist, loosening the curtain's grip with raw strength alone. He grabbed the corner of the curtain around his head with his left hand and yanked it away before tossing it toward the ground. Bang! He fired a shot at the other half of the curtain behind the window, stopping it from attempting another assault on him. The curtain stopped immediately as a dark red liquid oozed out from it. Whoosh! On the field, Leonard Mitchell was reciting his poems and was also hit by the cold, sinister winds infused with the intense sensation of death. His teeth chattered, making it hard for him to enunciate his poems. The messy weeds in the garden suddenly extended, wrapping themselves around his heels. A black shadow hurled itself at him along with the violent winds. Leonard, whose body had become rigid, failed to fire in time. He could only pull back his shoulder and raise his arm. Thud! The black shadow smashed into his forearm, the thorns on its body piercing his skin. It was a pretty, bright red flower, its origins unknown. In pain, Leonard tossed aside the flower dyed with his blood. Bang! He fired a shot at the spreading vines, causing dark red liquid to ooze out. Tap, tap, tap. Leonard quickened his pace and charged towards the shattered window on the first floor where the altar was situated behind. The vines retracted abruptly from where he had previously stood, as if hiding from something invisible. Tracy took advantage of the chaos created by destroying the altar and a suspension-style ritual to conceal herself once again. She managed to fool the spirit visions of the Nighthawks and escape the pincer attack before making her way to a spot behind the 3 Nighthawks. She extended her right hand, immediately causing a cold wind to blow. It carried the flower dyed with Leonard's blood right into her palm. Tracy did not stop. With the flower in hand, she nimbly made her way over the steel fence and escaped in the direction of the Tussock River. Leonard, who had just entered the first level, turned his head abruptly, as though he was listening to something. His expression changed. He frantically pulled up his sleeve and looked at the wound caused by the flower. With his constitution, the wound had already stopped bleeding. There was only some red swelling that remained. Leonard's expression became grim. He pinched his left index finger and pulled his fingernail straight out. His face contorted in pain, but he did not pause. As he recited something silently, he sliced open the coagulated wound with the fingernail. When the fingernail was dyed with his dark red blood, he pulled out a few strands of hair from his scalp and wrapped the fingernail with his hair. Beside the Tussock River, Tracy slowed down. She shot her gaze toward the flower in her hand. She was chanting something as a ball of black, illusory fire suddenly appeared in her palm. The flames enveloped the flower, burning it to ashes. After completing this, Tracy jumped into the river and submerged herself. At the same time, Leonard tossed the blood-stained fingernail wrapped in his hair to the corner. He saw it burn and release a foul stench. The fingernail and hair disappeared quickly, leaving only some dust behind. Leonard heaved a sigh of relief. He entered the first level through the window and said to Dunn and Fry, who were destroying the altar, "The target has escaped. But it's all right, our primary objective was to stop the ritual." Dunn sighed and looked at the puppets on the table. She was very cautious and very powerful. She sensed us approaching her ahead of time, otherwise she should be, at the very least, a sequence 7 beyond her. Give Klein the signal. Ask him to come over. Through the brief interaction in the dream, he had determined that the enemy was female. Klein was hidden in the shadows of a building dozens of meters away from the target building. He heard the faint sound of gunshots and the howling of violent winds. If the enemy runs towards me, should I draw my gun or should I pretend that I didn't see him? He thought as he shivered in cold sweat. A beyonder that could, through various means, cut short the lives of others definitely wasn't a sequence 9 or sequence 8 beyonder. They certainly wouldn't be someone that a seer like him could fight against face to face. Even if he sacrificed himself, he might not be able to slow the target down enough for Dunn and Leonard to catch up with him. It was fortunate that the Evernight goddess, the mistress of disaster, seemed to hear her loyal guard's prayers. No one ran towards the location where Klein was hiding. After a few minutes, he heard a melodious song coming from the target building. Cocking his ears to the side so he could hear better, Klein confirmed that it was the popular local tune that Leonard Mitchell always hummed. It was filled with bass words. Phew, he let out a breath of relief. He held his gun in one hand and his cane in the other. He then walked out of the shadows towards the target building. The popular local tune was the meeting signal that he had agreed upon with Dunn and the rest. Klein took 2 steps and suddenly paused. He leaned his cane against the metal fencing and switched the revolver to his other hand. Then, he took off the silver chain inside his sleeve and let the topaz pendant hang down naturally. Klein waited till the topaz stabilized and immediately closed his eyes and entered a cogitation state. He recited a divination statement. The singing earlier was an illusion. The singing earlier was an illusion. After repeating 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the pendant spinning counterclockwise. It's not an illusion. Klein put away his pendulum, grabbed his cane, and quickly got close to the arch-shaped metal gate leading to the target building. He then passed the black cane to his right hand and held it with the revolver. He extended his hands to touch the fence, intending to push it open, but he suddenly felt a piercing chill. It was as though someone had poured a bucket of ice down his neck without warning. Klein hissed and jerked his hands back, his teeth clenched. It's just like winter here, under the dim starlight and distant street lamp. He looked through the garden behind the metal fencing. He saw the withered branches, fallen flowers, and leaves covered with white frost on the brown soil. Amazing, Klein marveled in his head. He bent his fingers and tapped his glabella to activate his spirit vision. He returned his silver-inlaid cane to his left hand and pushed it against the fence to open the closed gate. The gate squeaked, and he passed through it sideways. He stepped onto the stone path that led directly to the greyish-blue building. On both sides of the path were twisted plants that seemed to resemble ghouls in the dark. The scene reminded Klein of various horror stories and paranormal films. he subconsciously slowed down his breathing and walked faster. However, after just a few more steps, someone suddenly patted his left shoulder. Badump, badump. Klein's heart skipped, then started thumping rapidly. He raised his right hand, aimed his revolver, and slowly turned around to look. In the dim light, he saw a flimsy branch that had nearly fallen off. This is what we call scaring ourselves. Klein twitched the corner of his lips, waved the cane, and knocked the branch off. He continued moving forward as faint sobs sounded in his ears. Blurry, translucent shadows appeared before his eyes. These shadows had swarmed over after feeling the breaths of a living person and the warmth of flesh and blood. Klein jumped in fright and immediately ran into the door of the greyish-blue building. This is what the captain meant by getting a sense of the atmosphere. It's much scarier than the last time I helped Sarah Wayville. The resentment of that aggrieved spirit is more rigid than the shadows. She hadn't taken the initiative to attack back then, he thought as he walked towards the altar in the middle of the living room. It was a round table full of crudely made puppets. 3 unlit candles stood amidst the puppets. Dunn Smith stood right before the altar with his back to Klein. He took one puppet after another and looked at them. Corpse Collector Fry looked at the floating shadows and extended his hand in an attempt to comfort them, but all his hand did was pass through them helplessly. The shadows didn't attack him, seemingly recognizing him as one of their own. When Leonard Mitchell noticed Klein's arrival, he changed his tone, turning his voice softer but charming. Calm is the morn without a sound. Calm as to suit a calmer grief. And only throw the faded leaf. The chestnut pattering to the ground one. In the soothing recitation of the poem, Klein seemed to see a clear lake reflecting the moonlight and a crimson moon hanging quietly, high in the sky. The restless shadows calmed down and stopped chasing after the warm breath of the living that talks among them. Dunn put down the puppet in his hand, turned around, and said to Klein, "This is a ceremony for a terrifying curse. It's fortunate that we've already destroyed it. First prepare a ritual to comfort the remaining spirits, then try to communicate with the spirits of the dead and see if you can get any clues from them." Klein, who realized that he was no longer a burden, immediately held his chest out and said, "Yes, Captain." He reached the altar in a few steps and extended his hands to sweep the puppets off of the round table. At that moment, he noticed from the corner of his eyes that every puppet had a name and a corresponding message. "Captain, did you discover anyone you know?" Klein asked in passing. Then, he glanced at Dunn as Dunn looked at him. Both of them fell silent. "I'm so silly, why would I ask any questions that tests the captain's memory?" Klein nearly covered his face and sighed. "If it were any other boss, they would definitely find an opportunity to make my life difficult because of this. Luckily, the captain will forget about this. I wonder if that's an advantage or a disadvantage," he thought, half glad, half joking. After a short silence, Dunn seemed to finally be capable of differentiating reality from the dream world. He replied, "There's someone you know." "Who?" Klein stopped, his hand still extended to put a candle back to where it was supposed to be. "Joyce Mayer, the survivor of the Alfalfa tragedy," Dunn replied simply. Joyce Mayer, Anna's fiancée. Klein suddenly thought of Salas in the workhouse. He seemed to have been instigated and misled by someone, causing him to bring forward his rage and committing arson. Klein retracted his right hand and said in a deep voice, "Instigator Trice." He used the lives that were cut short as a sacrifice, intending to curse all survivors of the Alfalfa tragedy. Because he didn't know who uncovered his involvement and lodged a police report. If Trice took revenge directly, it would have been impossible to wipe out all the targets scattered throughout Tingen. After 2 or 3 murders, he would have been noticed by the Nitorks, mandated punishers, and the machinery hive mind. Then, he would have lost his chance to continue his murdering spree. Klein filled in the blanks of why Trice had started all this. Dunn nodded first, then he shook his head. "Not all survivors, but only survivors in Tingen. His curse ritual can only affect the people within this range. Besides, the host of the ritual is a female, not Trice." Klein creased his eyebrows and asked, "Perhaps it's an expert that the Theosophy Order sent to help Trice?" "Yes, the origins of the Theosophy Order might involve the Demones sect. It's fairly normal for their experts to be female." Dunn smiled and said in his deep voice, "I agree with your judgment. Although we only encountered that woman and not Trice, there are guesses that we can make. Such as, the woman and Trice don't stay together. Or, that Trice was out looking for people who are dying soon." Klein didn't say anything further. He set the 3 candles in place, took out the full moon essence oil, crimson sandalwood, and other ingredients, and set out the altar quickly. After he used a silver dagger to make a sealed wall, he started praying to the Evernight goddess, the mistress of calm and silence. He prayed that the shadows inside and outside the house would be comforted completely. Unfortunately, in the subsequent attempt to communicate with the spirits of the dead, Klein could only see a little of what the spirits had seen before their deaths. There weren't any useful clues. After settling the shadows into a peaceful sleep in the dark night, he ended the ceremony and removed the spirituality wall. He then shook his head and told the others. The backlash from the disrupted ritual caused severe damage, and the remnant images of the host were lost. Dunn wasn't surprised. He pointed at the stairs and said, "Let's look around on the 2nd floor and give it another try." "Okay." Klein, Leonard, and Fry nodded in agreement. The 3 Nitorks went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and parted ways to search through each room. In the end, they met in a bedroom that was filled with a faint aroma. They saw messy dresses lying around and open boxes. Dunn took out a box from the dressing table and smelled it before asking, "Are these cosmetics?" "To be exact, they are skin care products." Ever since Emperor Russell, they were not lumped together with a broad term, Leonard explained with a smile. Captain, as a gentleman, there are certain things you have to know. Klein didn't join their discussion, but cast his gaze towards the mirror on the dressing table. There was an obvious crack on the mirror, and there were shattered pieces on the rug beneath. The Beyonder left in a rush. She didn't destroy it entirely, he suddenly said in a deep voice. Maybe I could give this a try. I'll leave it to you, Dunn replied in confidence. Klein quickly brought the candles up from the first floor and lit them in front of the shattered mirror. Under the dim, flickering candlelight, he took out the items like full moon essence to create a spirituality wall. After Klein prepared everything, he stood before the mirror that reflected the lights of all three candles and chanted in Hermes. I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I pray for the mirror to receive a brief restoration. I pray for it to show every person that it reflected in the past month. As the incantation was being recited, a strong wind suddenly howled within the spirituality wall. The shattered pieces of the mirror swirled off the ground and returned to their original locations. The mirror that was covered in cracks suddenly rippled with a gloomy brilliance. Klein wiped his hands over it and a human figure suddenly appeared in the frame. But that figure wasn't Klein. It was a gentle and sweet-looking young maiden with a round face. Perhaps it was because the mirror was broken, or perhaps it was because the backlash of the interrupted ritual that affected the second floor as well. Her facial features were blurry, and her actual appearance wasn't exactly clear. But even so, Klein found the person unusually familiar. Adapted from Alfred Tennyson's In Memoriam A.H. H. O. by MDCCCXXXII. 11. When faced with a strange sense of familiarity, other Sequence 9 Beyonders might try their best to recall or even disregard and forget about it. But Asir was different. Klein immediately ended the ritual and dispelled the wall of spirituality. He took out a piece of paper and wrote on it a statement, the source of the sense of familiarity. After which, he sat on the edge of the bed in the room and silently recited it with the piece of paper in hand. 7 times later, his pupils became darker. He fell asleep with the help of cogitation and started conversing with his own spirituality. In the hazy, contorted world, Klein saw a carriage. He saw a young lady wearing a long grey dress. This lady had smooth black hair, her face a little round. She had a gentle and pleasant demeanor, but her body was shivering unnaturally. The image flickered, and once again, Klein saw this young, pretty lady at the underground market. She was squatting and conversing with someone. The dream receded quickly, and Klein woke up, understanding why the image he saw in the mirror was so familiar. He had met this person before. The first time was at Daffodil Street, in the district near Iron Cross Street. The captain and the rest were chasing down Instigator Trice that night. There must be a connection. Klein thought for a few seconds, then set up the ritual once again. He asked for the help of the goddess to sketch the portrait of the enemy in his memory. Dunn and the rest had been waiting silently, without interrupting Klein unnecessarily. Only when he was done sketching did they crowd over and inspect the portrait. You met her before? Dunn asked. Klein nodded slightly and answered simply, yes. I saw her at the public carriage stop on Daffodil Street the night when you were going after the Instigator. It was in the district near Iron Cross Street. Then, there's a good chance that she was the enemy just now. The partner of the Instigator. Dunn nodded in thought. Leonard suddenly chimed in. Don't any of you feel that this portrait is very familiar? She looks a lot like Instigator Trice. Klein froze, immediately casting his gaze at the portrait again and studying it carefully. Yeah, they look very similar indeed. Round face, narrow eyes, gentle demeanor. The more he looked at the portrait, the more he felt that what Leonard said made sense. The biggest difference was that Instigator Trice had ordinary features, while the young lady could be considered pretty. Klein raised his head and looked at Leonard, noticing that he was signaling something to him by raising his brows. What does he mean? Klein was confused. Dunn Smith guessed she could be the Instigator's sister. Maybe like her brother she joined the Theosophy Order or the Demoness sect. Leonard sighed after he realized how bad Klein was at reading his mind. He said in a serious tone, I have a bold idea. What idea? Dunn asked. Leonard described succinctly, I think that this person is Instigator Trice. What? Fry exclaimed in shock. Dunn creased his brows and said, what you mean is that Instigator Trice is actually female, or a male who's pretending to be a female? No, from the dream, I can confirm that she's female. Klein had been exposed to many creative and ridiculous plots after all. He took another look at the portrait, and immediately had another guess. Could it be that Instigator Trice became a female? That could explain many things. For example, why would the trail leading to Trice suddenly sever? Why couldn't they find any traces, even with divination? Perhaps because there was a fundamental change to their target. The only question was how he could change into a woman in such a short span of time. And it appeared to be rather simple. He had pretty decent looks after his transformation even. I mean, to be honest, she's pretty attractive, Klein thought, distracted. Leonard nodded in relief. Yes, that's my theory. This can perfectly explain why Instigator Trice had seemed to vanish. It also fits with the strange fact that the upper echelons of the Demoness sect are all female. Dunn and Fry were momentarily at a loss for words. Even though they had seen many monsters and wondrous things, it was their first time dealing with a transformation like this. What you mean is that there are a considerable number of women in the upper echelons of the Demoness sect that used to be men? Dunn asked. He didn't wait for an answer before saying, that could be possible, perhaps it's their, no, the unique characteristic of their potion. Klein shivered a little as he listened. He felt that the potion of the Demoness sect was a trap. Let's hope that a similar potion doesn't exist in the pathway of the seer. No, definitely not. That is the pathway of the Demoness. Even the name of the potion sounds wrong. But I still don't know what the corresponding sequence 1 to seer is. Klein subconsciously started praying to the goddess. Can potions accomplish such a thing? Fry asked with a little disbelief. Leonard laughed and threw up his hands. Even a Mittello sequence potion can cause unimaginable changes. After all, they all originated from the creator. Dunn turned to look at Klein, tried to divine where the target would appear next. All right. Klein went over to the pile of dresses and picked out one with mixed emotions. He spread it over the carpet. He held his cane over the dress and recalled the target's features and relevant information. He then began to recite in his heart. Trice know Triss's whereabouts. Triss's whereabouts. 7 times later, Klein's pupils turned from brown to black. Wind started to blow around him. His left hand released his cane, allowing the black cane to wobble. Despite the shaking, the cane failed to fall. It stood tall in its original position. There's an interference, Klein said with a deep tone. An interference implies that our assumptions are correct. That lady just now was most probably Instigator Trice. No, Trissy. Upon seeing this, Dunn nodded indiscernibly. They live up to the reputation of the Demoness sect, which has been active since the last epoch. Since Trice had transformed into Trissy, Dunn deduced that she wasn't part of the Theosophy Order, but the Demoness sect. Surveying the surroundings, Dunn sighed and said, we can search for her through different means, such as where these clothes came from or the owner of this house. We can also get the police department to patrol the train stations and piers. We might be able to get some clues like that, but Trissy will definitely have had enough time to leave Tingen. Yes, I'll try it again above the grey fog when I'm back at home. Klein was cautious of people like Trissy who wanted to unleash a massacre on a whim. He wanted to desperately find her and execute her on the spot. Leonard, head to the police department and gather a group to wrap up things here. Klein, you can go back and rest now. Dunn rubbed his temples and paused for a few seconds. He said to Klein, partially to test him and also to teach him. How would you have handled this evening's mission? Assume that me, Leonard, and Fry are the only members on your team. Klein creased his brows in thought for more than 10 seconds. I'd first use divination to ascertain if the ritual would take effect soon. If the answer was negative, then I'd stick to observing and not approach. Then I'd notify the police department to deploy personnel around the area, as well as gather at least 5 cannons to bombard the entire building till wherever Trissy was hiding was leveled. She could either be blasted to death in the building, or attempt to flee amidst the cannon fire. This would easily expose her. Until then, I would station you and the rest at different spots. He got more and more excited as he continued. He felt that his idea was simple and effective, barbaric and decisive. It was very safe and very appropriate. Dunn, Leonard, and Fry were dumbfounded. They didn't say anything for a long time. Captain, is that not a good idea? The excited Klein's heart thumped rapidly when he saw that they had no reaction. Dunn was silent for a few seconds before he said, no, it is a good idea. But the premise is that we have to confirm that forceful destruction of the altar would create a more disastrous outcome. As long-time talks, we are accustomed to relying on ourselves, our powers as beyond theirs, and guns in all circumstances. We're not used to allowing normal people to come into contact with supernatural incidents. All right, I was always an ardent fan of firepower bombardment, Klein added in his heart. Klein and Leonard walked to the carriage station about 500 meters away before they saw it. After waiting for a while, they returned to Iron Cross Street. One went to the nearby police station, while the other returned to Daffodil Street. When Klein arrived at his front door, he adjusted his clothes and made sure that everything was all right before fishing out his keys and opening the door. Melissa and Benson were in the living room, quietly doing assignments and reading books respectively under the light from the gas lamp. Benson must be tired after toiling at work the entire day, yet he perseveres in his studies after he comes home. What a determined man. I can't do that. All I can think about now is lying down. Klein glanced at his brother and smiled, giving a silent greeting by raising his hand. Benson smiled and said, I now understand the price behind a handsome salary. There's a price for everything in this world. There's something we must give before we can gain anything in return, Klein said, leaving his cane on the rack next to the door. That's apparently something Emperor Russell said, right? Melissa stopped writing and looked up. The Tingen Technical School was different from universities and public schools. There was only 2 weeks for summer break, from late July to early August. Their lessons resumed the moment the hottest days were over. Is that so? I don't remember, Klein replied, his expression a little rigid. He took off his hat and headed upstairs. He intended to divine Triss's whereabouts as soon as possible. Suddenly, he heard his stomach rumble. He felt intense hunger pangs. Oh right, I haven't had dinner. But the note I left said that the security company would provide food and asked them not to leave any food for me. Seriously, Captain. You actually forgot about it. Klein's expression changed several times as he intended to pretend that he was full. At that moment, Melissa turned and looked at him. She pointed to the kitchen and said, we left a small piece of lamb chop and a bowl of thick vegetable soup for you. There are a few sticks of bread left too. After saying this, she buried her head back into her work and muttered to herself, I felt that meals provided by work wouldn't be too good, probably making people lose their appetite. Sis. You worry too much. No, you're just so meticulous. Klein was suddenly energized. He smiled and said, Melissa, your concern is very reasonable. It's true that I'm actually a little hungry. Yeah, let me change and take a shower. Although his mouth was already watering, it was even more important to confirm instigator Triss's whereabouts. No one knew what insane measures that bastard would take in order to exact revenge on society. Okay, Melissa didn't lift her head, but continued her revision. Tap, tap, tap. Klein ran to the second floor and entered his bedroom. He locked the door, took off his jacket and armpit holster. Then, he took out a simple silver knife from the drawer. After sealing his room with a spirituality wall, he took a breath, steadied his emotions, and walked 4 steps counterclockwise. After the usual incantation, Klein appeared once again in the lofty palace above the grey fog. He was getting used to the mid-ravings that he heard during the transportation process. Having completed a few rituals that day, he massaged his temples as he was slightly tired. He willed a piece of brown goat skin to appear on the long bronze table. Klein thought seriously, then wrote down the divination statement, Triss's whereabouts. He wasn't sure if the name was written correctly, but he could use the girl's appearance and other detailed information as a guide as well. He held the goat skin and leaned back into the chair. He recalled the things related to Trissi in his head, then recited the divination statement 7 times. He emptied his mind, closed his eyes, and entered a dream state with the aid of cogitation. In the illusory scene amidst the fog, he saw a steam engine that spurted dense smoke and sparks. He also saw the rows of leather seats in a clean train carriage. The gentle and sweet-looking Trissi with her round face and long eyes sat near a window. There was a checkered fishnet hat on the table before her. Klein made repeated attempts to confirm the train number, but he failed to discern it. Soon, he couldn't stand the pressure and left his dream. The long bronze table and illusory crimson stars appeared before his eyes again. I could only confirm that Trissi took the steam locomotive and left Tingen. There weren't any more clues, Sigh. It seems like this mysterious space only helps me eliminate interferences. But it doesn't do much to enhance the standard of my divinations. Klein rapped the edge of the table and thought about his next step. Through the divination, he could be entirely certain that the target had once been instigator Trice. The new Trissi, however, was already fleeing Tingen. Given the circumstances, he didn't think his new divination would help Dunn. Klein quickly made a decision. Captain already said that he would send a telegram to Backland, Engmat Harbour, and other main stops along the railway, so that Trissi will be placed on the wanted list throughout the country. I won't report the divination result then, in case it would draw suspicion towards me. Klein quickly made up his mind, because regardless of his warning, Dunn was already using the most appropriate measures to follow up on the matter. Since he couldn't see the train number in the dream divination, using the spirit pendulum and other methods would be equally ineffective, even if he attempted to do so by process of elimination. It was just like the situation with the red chimney. At that moment, he felt mentally drained, so he didn't stay above the grey fog any longer but enveloped himself with his spirituality and simulated the feeling of falling. When he returned to his room, his mind was filled with the thought of tasty, glistening mutton. I must add some final praise to Lady. Klein swallowed his saliva, swiftly removed the spirituality wall, and opened his door. The next morning at 9:20, he entered the Blackthorn Security Company with his cane in hand. Good morning, Klein. I have good news. Roseanne waved her hands excitedly from behind the reception desk. Klein's eyes lit up as he asked, "We caught Trissi?" "Trissi? Who is she?" The green-dressed Roseanne looked lost. "You probably don't know her." "What's the good news?" Klein redirected the topic. Roseanne replied with a glowing smile, "The captain's request has been approved. The police department is going to transfer 2 police staff members who have come across supernatural incidents to be clerks here. I finally don't need to frequently stay up all night." Praise the lady. "That's great news," Klein echoed sincerely. After exchanging a few more pleasantries with Roseanne, he went through the partition and went underground. He planned to continue with his mysticism lessons. When he passed the captain's office and the Talks entertainment room, he popped his head in and looked around. He saw that Dunn, Leonard, and the rest were still there. It meant that the search and elimination investigation the night before had failed to return anything worthwhile. The rest would be handed over to the police department, so that they could take care of the tedious follow-up tasks. At first, Klein wanted to chat with the captain to get an update on the situation. But he saw that Captain was busy typing telegrams, so he decided not to disturb him. He could ask the captain again at lunch. He went underground by following the stairs and saw the 2 classic gas lamps in their metal racks. He saw the ever-quiet corridor which was lit up by the light behind the glass. He breathed in the cold but refreshing breeze, took a few steps, and suddenly stopped. He suddenly looked towards the gas lamp and his eyebrows gradually creased. He had made a crucial mistake. A mistake that could only be made by someone with knowledge from Earth. In his divination above the grey fog the night before, Klein had seen Trissi taking a steam locomotive. Hence, he subconsciously believed that it was something happening at that moment. But this world had yet to invent electric lights or similar equipment. When the sky grew dark, there were almost no steam locomotives in operation that ferried humans. Klein, who was accustomed to trains which operated at night, had instinctively missed out on that fact. In other words, it wasn't something that happened last night. It was a scene from the future. Which meant that it was going to happen that day or the day after. Klein's heartstrings tightened and he paced back and forth. Then he went upstairs again. He knocked and opened the door to the entertainment room, and he saw that Leonard was reciting a poem by the window, looking helpless. Klein ignored Kenley, Royal, and Seekatron who were playing cards. He looked towards Leonard and said, "I have a question for you. Would it be that you want to learn tricks to entertain the ladies?" Leonard teased, putting down selected poems by Roussel. He exited the entertainment room and followed Klein halfway down the stairs that led underground. He then looked into Klein's eyes and said with a chuckle, "It seems like you did a successful divination last night." Klein didn't explain further but said straightforwardly, "I divined that Tracy will leave on a steam locomotive." After the conversation at the workhouse in the West Borough, he didn't mind appearing slightly special before Leonard. Steam locomotive, the earliest train is at 7 in the morning. Leonard took out his pocket watch from his shirt and flipped it open to take a glance. "No time to waste. I'll tell the captain that I received a reliable tip." He quickly went upstairs and left the Blackthorn Security Company. After being gone for a few minutes, he returned and went into Dunn Smith's office. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and watched the captain send a telegram after gathering the other Nighthawks who were playing cards. They soon left out the door. Recalling what happened earlier, he felt conflicted. It was a different lesson than the one he received from the death of the suited clown. He had committed a mistake with similar characteristics which made him seem to understand this lesson more, leaving a deeper impression on him. Turning past the armory and entering the duty room, he took off his top hat and coat, then hung them onto the clothes rack naturally. Old Neil had just finished making himself some hand-ground coffee. He happily took a sip and asked, "Would you like one?" "All right." Klein sat down, as carefree as if he had returned home. Old Neil glanced at him and frowned, quipping, "Still 3 cubes of sugar with a spoon of milk. You're such a sweet tooth. This is harmful to your teeth and your body." No, I only like it sweet when I'm drinking coffee. When I have grilled steak or roasted meat, I prefer rose salt, black pepper, fennel, and other condiments." Klein always believed that he was a fan of all flavors. Old Neil finished the coffee quickly. He pushed it over and said, "Do you want to take a break or start straight away?" "Let me settle down for a few minutes." The captain and the team got a tip about Triss's whereabouts, and they are on the way to the steam locomotive station. "I wonder what the outcome will be," Klein sighed. Old Neil clicked his tongue and said, "Is the tip detailed enough?" "Are they sure which train it is?" "No, it's not confirmed," Klein said, pursing his lips. Old Neil suddenly laughed. Under such circumstances, the possibility of failure is much higher than success. Trissy should be a sequence 7 beyonder, and a beyonder at that level won't be captured so easily. Hey, don't rely on divination. Divination isn't all powerful. You'll only obtain symbolic signs which are very easy to interpret them wrongly or ignore something. Klein recalled the mistake that he made this time and felt melancholic. He nodded sincerely. Yeah, divination isn't all powerful. After he said that, he sighed. His mind, body, and soul suddenly entered a magical state. He leaned backwards slightly, intending to let out a breath. Just then, he suddenly heard an illusory shattering noise in his ear. He felt something dissolving inside him, blending together with his spirit. Klein half closed his eyes and experienced the unique and indescribable feeling in silence. Klein didn't need anyone to tell him that it was a result of the complete digestion of the seer potion. The first town that the Tussock River passed by after it flowed through Tingen City was called Bienya. It was also the first stop from Tingen to Backland for the steam locomotive. On the platform, Trissy changed into a long beige dress and put on a woman's circular hat. Fine fishnet gauze hung down from the edge of her hat, covering half her face. Her appearance became blurry and indiscernible. She had already sent a telegram to her partner in Tingen to remind the other person to be careful. She told them that she had used money she burgled to buy a steam locomotive ticket to Backland. The reason Trissy didn't get on the train from Tingen but went downstream to Wienia was because she still had her instinct and rich experience as an assassin. Woo. A train let out a long and sharp whistle as the long metal behemoth chugged to a stop next to the platform while spurting smoke and sparks. Trissy didn't carry any luggage and entered the first cabin. At the same time, she decided to get off the train after 3 stations and enter Backland through other methods. In the basement of St. Selena Cathedral, Klein closed his eyes and leaned backwards in his seat. He took in the complete digestion of the potion, and he faintly saw one illusory star after another. Those stars seemed to share a baffling connection with him, and they seemed to want to run together and fuse as one. After the indescribable feeling of hunger and thirst receded, Klein returned to normal and stopped having any additional experiences. But my mind feels a lot more relaxed and pure. He opened his eyes and thought. At that moment, he knew that he had become a real, complete seer. The light of the gas lamp glowed through the glass, illuminating the guard room. Old Neil finished flipping through his newspaper, took a sip of coffee, and looked at Klein. "How do you feel now? Have you calmed down? Or do you need a glass of wine, or an advance on your salary, or a day off?" Klein, who had completely digested the seer potion, was attempting to change his switch that activated his spirit vision with cogitation. He didn't want it to be too obvious. The present him no longer needed to rely on a physical motion to activate his spirit vision. Therefore, he could use a more concealed approach to achieve his goal, for example, stroking the joints of his middle finger with his thumb in quick succession, or clicking twice with his left molar. Klein considered the situations in which he needed to use his spirit vision while holding a revolver in one hand and a cane in the other. Finally, he settled on clicking his molar. His left molar would be used to activate the spirit vision, and his right molar to deactivate it. After repeatedly suggesting to himself, he completed the change. He then opened his eyes and smiled. "I was merely too concerned about the captain's operation. I don't need to calm myself down." At the same time, he clicked his left molar twice and attempted to activate his spirit vision. He wanted to familiarize himself with this method as quickly as possible. Cough, cough, cough. Old Neil started coughing violently. He coughed till his face turned red, like a cooked lobster. "What happened?" Klein froze before asking in concern. He scanned old Neil's aura seriously, only to notice that the colours representing his health were still normal, only a little dull due to his age. Old Neil coughed for nearly 20 seconds before earning respite. He felt for his cup of coffee and slowly took a sip. Everyone makes mistakes, ahem. I choked on my drink just now. Shall we begin our mysticism lessons for today? All right. Klein silently clicked his right molars twice. Klein was elated, yet frustrated that he had completely digested the seer potion a week or two ahead of his prediction. He was naturally glad that he was freed from the risk of losing control and would advance soon, obtaining even more beyond their powers. That was something anyone would be happy and excited about. But he was also frustrated, as it disrupted his plans and schedules. Considering the fact that he still had to stay with the Tingenet Hawks for some time, Klein thought that secretly advancing to Clown wasn't the wisest choice. If he did so, he would be constantly worried about being exposed, and he would be unable to use his abilities when there were missions, making it even more dangerous for himself. He planned to learn from Spirit Medium Dali and submit an application to the higher-ups. He would use his contributions to obtain the recipe and extraordinary ingredients before officially advancing into a Sequence 8 network. But there was a difference between grasping a potion in a month and in a year. Klein could bear the scrutiny of the Holy Cathedral and become a talent for nurturing, but he didn't want the higher-ups to suspect him. He needed to find a convincing reason to explain his circumstances. He had planned to use the time before the seer potion was completely digested to lay some foundations with the captain. For example, he would mention that he felt his spirituality become more active whenever he went to the divination club, or pretend to casually describe the laws of a seer that he had derived from helping other people divine their fortunes. He could also mention that he didn't hear any voices that he shouldn't be hearing, or see things that are not for his eyes. This way, the higher-ups of the Networks would think that he had unintentionally learned something from Dali when completing his mission and had done a more thorough job than her. This would make the higher-ups focus more on summarizing the laws and discovering the acting method, reducing the suspicion placed on Klein. That way, I could even help the captain and the rest learn about the acting method Klein added in his heart. He felt that Dunn Smith was a good captain. He had no glaring flaws other than his poor memory. Thus, he wanted to reduce the risk of Dunn losing control and make him more powerful. Of course, Klein could also choose to apply after a year to avoid any risks. But the continuous coincidences and the red chimney he saw in his dream divination gave him no choice but to improve his abilities as soon as possible. I'll lay the foundation with the captain 3 or 4 times over the next 2 weeks before formally submitting my request. At the same time, I can head over to the underground market to see if there are any of the necessary extraordinary ingredients. They will probably be very expensive. Klein quickly made a decision and focused his attention once again on the mysticism lessons. Time passed quickly as lunchtime slowly approached. Old Neil finished his coffee and cleared the stuff on the table as he laughed. Your mysticism lessons will come to an end soon. From the test just now, it would seem that you can create charms for yourself now. That's my plan for the next few days. Klein heaved a satisfied sigh. Charms were different from the protective amulets he had given Benson and Melissa. They needed to be carved with the help of ritualistic magic, and they had certain unique abilities that could be used in battle. But a low-grade charm couldn't do everything. The spirituality it contained would decrease over time, and had to be renewed once every 2 weeks. Also, he needed to activate them with specific incantations. It was impossible to use them at will. Furthermore, the charms wielded by the Nitorks were still limited to the domains of the Evernight goddess. Klein could only make 3 different kinds of charms for the time being. The first was the slumber charm, and its effect was similar to Dunn Smith's and Leonard Mitchell's ability to put someone to sleep with their singing. The second was the requiem charm, which was able to suit ghosts, souls, zombies, and the like. It could also deal with vengeful and evil spirits to a certain extent. The last was the dream charm. Its abilities allowed the wielder to enter the dream of someone else. These abilities were similar to the abilities of the Midnight Poet and Nightmare from the Sleepless sequence, so Dunn and Leonard had no use for these charms. Corpse Collector Fry, Sleepless Royal, and Kenny would bring 1 or 2 along with them, but they hadn't needed them in a long time. They frequently brought their charms back to Old Neil so he could recharge them. Old Neil glanced at Klein and smiled. I remember you saying that you practiced a lot this month and have run out of materials. Are you going to the underground market? Klein was taken aback at first before he nodded with a pained heart. Yes. He clearly knew the prices of the ingredients. He could only hope that he succeeded in making the charms on his first try instead of wasting materials. After being presented with the mission of bringing lunch underground, Klein put on his jacket and hat before returning to the Blackthorn Security Company on the 2nd floor with cane in hand. As he walked past the entertainment room, he saw that Leonard and the rest had already returned and were enjoying their lunches. Knock, knock, knock. He knocked on the captain's door. Please come in, Dunn's mellow voice sounded. Klein pushed the door open and took off his hat. Captain, did you catch Instigator Trissy? Dunn rubbed his temples and shook his head in exhaustion. We didn't find her at Tingen Station, but according to the telegraph we received from Backland, a passenger saw her in the first-class carriage of the earliest train. Regrettably, she got off in the middle of the journey. How regrettable. Klein sighed even though he had expected this. Divination isn't all powerful. Dunn's grey eyes swept past him. There's no need to be depressed. It isn't easy to capture a Sequence 7 Beyonder. At the very least, we disrupted Triss's evil ritual and saved at least 40 innocent lives. Furthermore, we understand her situation now. She can no longer commit crimes as she wishes. If she tries to do something similar, she'll be noticed, discovered, and reported at any time. Sooner or later, she'll be captured by the Nitorks, mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind. It's even possible that she'll be killed. Let's hope that is the case. May the goddess bless us. Klein drew the crimson moon on his chest. Following that, he paused and pondered over his words. Captain, I haven't heard unwanted voices or seen unwanted visions for over a week now. Also, that's true even when I am in cogitation or using my spirit vision. Really? Dunn creased his brows, puzzled. Klein immediately elaborated, I feel that I'm not far off from achieving full control over the seer potion. This could be due to my frequent visits to the Divination Club and helping others tell their fortune. Why do you think so? Dunn immediately changed his seating posture, his expression lost. Klein added a stammer into his sentence. Every time I head to the Divination Club, I can feel my spirituality becoming more active, and every time I help someone divine something, my heart, body, and soul become more relaxed. I've also come up with a set of rules for a seer. I've been following it strictly, just like how a mystery prior can, do as you wish, but do no harm. I found inspiration from this maxim and tried coming up with a maxim designed for seers. I think that this might be an effective way to help beyonders gain control over their potions faster and reduce the risk of losing control. Just like Madame Dally, who has always been a spirit medium. It was unknown when Dunn had taken out his pipe. He placed it at his nose and took a whiff, seemingly forgetting about Klein as he thought for a few minutes. A remarkable guess, and an interesting trial. Klein had only wanted to briefly mention it this time around to set up an underlying reason, so he did not say anything further. He switched to a half-joking tone and said, perhaps I'll be the fastest Nip talk in history to gain control of a Sequence 9 potion. May the goddess watch over you, Dunn blessed him, not taking him seriously. He then slipped into deep thought once again. Witnessing this, Klein turned around and said his goodbyes before leaving the captain's office. He was closing the door to the room when he suddenly thought of another difficult question. How in the world was he going to act as a clown? Must I join a circus? There are no fixed circuses in Tingen, they're all roaming ones. Klein's expression became a little bitter. Being a seer was still a rather respectable occupation. Klein would still be able to hold his head up high even if he was spotted by someone he knew. But if he became a clown, there was no way his reputation would hold. Perhaps there are other ways of acting as a clown. There were no circuses or clowns when the blasphemy slate was revealed to the world. Forget it, I won't have the chance to advance for another 2 or 3 weeks. So there's no need to deliberate over this for now. Klein avoided the question and headed to the reception area. He walked toward Roseanne, Mrs. Oriana, and Bredt to fetch his and old Neil's lunch. After eating lunch, Klein only rested for half an hour before he rushed to the shooting club to practice with his revolver. He didn't dare to relax, not one bit. After practicing his shooting skills day after day and expending more than 1,000 bullets, he was finally shooting well enough to earn Dunn Smith's basic approval. He was pretty good at fixed target shooting. After practicing for a while, he put away his revolver and took the public carriage to a stop close to the house of his combat teacher, Gawain. Then, he walked for 10 minutes before arriving at the door. He changed into his night training suit that had been left to dry in the sun. After running, skipping rope, lifting weights, squatting, and other exercises, not to mention footwork and punching training, he was covered in sweat and felt exhausted. Take a break for 15 minutes. Gawain's blonde white hair and deep facial lines made him look hard and stern. He took out his pocket watch and flipped it open to glance at the time. Since they first began training, he had ultimately maintained his silence. He only spoke to Klein when there was a need to switch training methods or to correct one of Klein's mistakes whenever one arose. Klein panted for air, but he didn't dare to rest straight away. He paced back and forth slowly. The most direct feedback of his combat training was that he was much tanner. His skin had turned bronze under the sun. Gawain put away his pocket watch and stood next to the crude training field behind his house. He crossed his arms as he watched Klein cool down. He was as quiet as a marble statue. Teacher, besides fighting with fists, would you teach me how to use a straight sword, broadsword, rapier, and spear? Klein asked proactively. He was in a good mood, as he had just digested the seer potion. He had seen weapons like the straight sword and rapier in Gawain's collection room before. There was also chest armor and full body armor. He knew that Gawain wasn't only good at fighting hand to hand. Bathed in sunlight, Gawain swept his gaze at Klein. He lowered his voice and replied, "It's useless for you to learn any of those. Those weapons have all fallen behind the times, and their only places in museums or the private collections of collectors." He fell silent for a few seconds before adding with a voice that had experienced the vicissitudes of life, "They have been eliminated. You should focus on guns. Even combat is merely supplementary." Klein looked at his listless teacher and chuckled as he spoke. "I don't think so. Every minister, every member of parliament, every general, every one of them thinks so," Gawain said, clenching his teeth. Klein stopped and acted like he was a true keyboard warrior. He responded with ease and fluency, "No, they have merely retreated from the front lines of a battlefield. They still have their uses elsewhere. Why does combat have to be used against firearms? They could be used together. I believe a person who is more flexible, swifter in action, and quicker in response could use guns in a more effective manner." When he saw Gawain's eyes suddenly sharpen, Klein turned smug and continued, "The other weapons aren't eliminated either. They only need some enhancement to be more portable. We could form a squad with high maneuverability. A group that's designed to circle the front lines and launch an attack from behind the enemy and fight right to their core. In such a small-scale surprise attack, a warrior who has outstanding hand-to-hand abilities and familiarity with various kinds of weapons could play an important role. You can imagine such a scene." Klein gave full play to his ability of knowing a bit of everything. He mixed and matched all the combat tactics the special forces on Earth had and described them to his teacher. He wasn't sure when Gawain's breathing became heavier. He stood there without moving an inch, seemingly unwilling to break the scene he imagined. Klein stole a glance at the man's reaction. He felt smug in his head as he cleared his throat and said in a restrained manner, "Teacher, what do you think about my plan? Is there any possibility of realizing it?" Gawain's body quivered as though he'd just awoken from a dream. He looked deeply into Klein's eyes and said, "Your break is doing you well. Repeat the whole set of exercises 10 times. Huh? Klein looked lost. Very soon, he started running and snapped back to reality. He roared in his heart, 10 sets. Teacher, no. I don't want to celebrate my complete digestion of the seer potion like this. Hey, didn't you gain any inspiration at all? Looking at Klein running towards the other side of the training field, Gawain suddenly uncrossed his arms and covered his face with one hand. He closed his eyes tightly, and the wrinkles on his face were deep and obvious. After nearly puking from exhaustion, Klein took a shower, changed clothes, and bade a still silent Gawain farewell. He took the public carriage and left. He didn't return home directly but headed to Evil Dragon Bar near the harbour. He planned to inquire about the price of Beyonder ingredients and buy items for making charms. On the way, Klein kept his mind on his tiny stash that he was carrying with him. He forced himself to stay alert and reached his destination with great difficulty. I need to save £4 for the remaining balance that I owe to the detective company. I can only use £3 and 5 solid tonight. He touched the paper notes in his pocket before grabbing his cane and alighting the carriage. At that moment, the sun had already begun slipping below the horizon. All the houses were gradually tainted with a twilight luster. The boxing matches and rat baiting with dogs were already warming up in Evil Dragon Bar. After passing through the billiard room and numerous rooms, Klein finally entered the underground market. He looked to the left and right, but he didn't see much to Adamizor, who was always active around there. Didn't old Neil say that Adamizor only managed to survive because the boss of Evil Dragon Bar feeds him? Klein asked himself curiously. As an talk, he remained vigilant to matters like that. He approached the brawny man guarding the door and asked, "Where's Adamizor?" The brawny man replied without a smile, "I have no idea where he's sleeping. He's been like that lately. He lies down in shivers and chants, 'Dead, dead, all corpses, everyone has to die.'" What scenes did he see this time? What triggered him? Klein creased his eyebrows slightly and asked for more details. He wanted to know where Adamizor was sleeping, but the guard didn't know either. "When I'm done, I'll look for him via divination to see what he's been through." After taking note of this, Klein walked towards one of the 2 rooms at the end of the trading market. According to old Neil, the room on the left was for loans and repayment, while the room on the right was for the buying and selling of precious items, including Beyonder ingredients. When he opened the door to enter the room on the right, Klein realized that there was a partition that separated it into 2 spaces, the inside and the outside. There were another 3 customers waiting on the outside. He lowered his silk top hat and queued behind the 3 customers. He leaned his body forward and supported himself with the cane as he waited in silence. Soon, the door of the partition opened and a customer in a bluish-grey harbour worker uniform came out. He kept his head low and left in a hurry. Klein lightly clicked his left molar twice and looked at the man with spirit vision. He then looked at the other 3 customers. There was nothing wrong with them other than the usual minor illnesses that people had. After another 10+ minutes, it was finally his turn. He opened the door and entered the room that was lit with a kerosene lamp. He locked the door and took the seat that belonged to the customer. He looked towards the old man wearing a black felt hat opposite him. "I'd like to know what Beyonder ingredients you have, and at what prices they are being sold." The cheek muscles of the elder were droopy and the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes were deep, but his body was well built. He didn't find Klein's request weird, because many customers weren't willing to let another person know what they wanted to buy before they confirmed that the seller had it available. Generally, they wished to be introduced to all options. The old man flipped to the newest pages of the notebook, stole a glance at Klein, and took a sip of his honey wine before he said, "Water Ghost's brain tissue costs from £3 to £15 depending on how intact it is. Star Crystal, £150 per 50 grams. £200 for 1 queen bee grass. £170 for an adult black spotted frog, £280 for human-faced rose, but there's only one." Klein controlled his emotional response. After he listened to the old man's introduction, he was surprised that an underground trading place like this had fewer than 30 Beyonder ingredients. As he touched the notes worth £7 in his pocket and thought of Miss Justice's attitude towards £1,000, he sighed. "Unfortunately, there is nothing I want." Without waiting for the elder to pose any further questions, he quickly turned around to open the door and made an exit. He returned to the underground market and looked around blankly. He stood there for a while and sighed with a bitter smile. "I'm probably the poorest boss among all the secret organizations that only steal his resolve of getting ingredients internally from their talks or through exchanges with Justice or the Hanged. Man." After circling the underground market twice, Klein picked and purchased ingredients to make charms, such as a partially finished silver piece, herbal powders needed for rituals, and natural ores. He spent £1 and 15 soldi in total. "My private stash of money only has £5 10 soldi left. Excluding the final payment to the detective, I still have £1 10 soldi." After Klein silently did the math regarding his financial situation, he felt helpless. Of course, he knew very well that he had only been working for just over a month. If the time span had been extended to a year, he should have been able to save up more than £100. "In another 2 weeks, I'll have to tell Benson and Melissa that I've gotten a raise to £3. We can hire a maid servant, but I won't have a private stash of money anymore," Klein thought as he walked towards the exit of the underground market. Just then, he saw old Neil in his classic black robe entering slowly. "Got everything?" Old Neil greeted with a chuckle. Yes, Klein answered frankly. Old Neil TSK'd immediately. You came really early. That's because I'm still hungry, but you've already had your dinner. Klein chatted casually with old Neil. After a while, the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, Swain, walked in with his Navy officer uniform draped over him. He approached the two of them with a mask of solemnity and lowered his voice. I need your help. What happened? Old Neil suddenly turned serious, and Klein couldn't help but feel a tug at his heartstrings. Swain's brown hair was messy, and there was a strong smell of alcohol in his breath. He replied in a low voice, a member from the mandated Punishers has lost control nearby. We have to finish him before he harms any commoners. Lost control? Klein's heart tightened as he nearly blurted out his question. Even though Dunn and old Neil had frequently emphasized the possibilities of losing control and the harm it caused, this was the first time he was experiencing an incident like that. He felt a little horrified, a little lost, a little scared, and a little saddened. He felt extremely mixed emotions. Among the cases that we have to deal with annually, a quarter of them were a result of Beyonders who lost control, and among the quarter of cases, a large number of them are our teammates. Dunn's words flashed past Klein's mind, slowing his reaction. Old Neil, who had experienced many incidents like this, immediately asked, Where is the Rampager? What do you need us to do? Klein was taken aback from hearing this. He had believed that a sleazy, half-retired personnel like old Neil would find an excuse to reject Swain's request or extort a huge sum in exchange for his help. Never did Klein expect old Neil to participate without any hesitation, not minding the differences between the talks and mandated Punishers. Klein suddenly understood something when he looked at the serious old Neil. It didn't matter if they were talks, mandated Punishers, or machinery hive mind. Their aim was to stop supernatural powers from harming the innocent and maintain peace and stability in Tingen. If they were met with a dangerous and urgent situation, their sense of duty would propel them to help without hesitation. Swain answered succinctly, Be my support. He didn't explain why the person lost control or where the Rampager was. Instead, he made his way to the exit quickly. This ex-captain of the mandated Punishers was clearly an old alcoholic, but Klein realized that he could not keep up with the man's pace. He needed to break into a jog to ensure that he was not left behind. He turned his head to look at old Neil, only to see the old mystery prior break into a run. The three of them didn't pay any attention to the gazes of the guards on their way there. One of them had an old Navy uniform draped over him, another was in a dark classic robe, and the other in a black windbreaker. They charged out of the billiard room and into Evil Dragon Bar. The customers who were drinking shifted their gazes from the rat-baiting competition to Klein and company. Is that Boss Swain? Where's he going in such a hurry? Did someone default on their loan? Amidst the soft murmurs, some of the customers focused their attention back to the cage. They once again broke into an uproar, venting the stresses of their day. However, some of the more perceptive customers felt a faint sense of unease. Tap, tap, tap. Klein, old Neil, and Swain ran across the road and entered the harbour district. On that boat, Swain slowed down and pointed at a cargo ship not far away. Two mandated Punishers are circling the Rampager, preventing him from entering the Tussock River. Help me influence him and bring him under control. Leave the rest to me. Old Neil panted for air and said, All right, but you have to give me a minute. Phew, a minute to recover. Swain nodded and didn't say any more. He charged up to the ship and joined the fight. Upon hearing the sounds of combat on the ship, old Neil looked at the somewhat nervous Klein. He took out a piece of silver about the size of a baby's palm from a hidden pocket near his waist. He then passed the silver to Klein and said, Slumber charm. The incantation to activate this amulet is the phrase, Evernight in ancient Hermes. After you finish the incantation, inject your spirituality into the charm, and then throw it at the target after 3 seconds. All right. Klein extended his hand to receive the charm and felt moved. This charm was carved with Hermes incantations on both sides, as well as the corresponding symbols, path numbers, and the spell's characteristics. He didn't need to activate his spirit vision to feel the deep, serene power flowing within the charm. Old Neil stood up straight and took out a similar charm from his hidden pocket and held it in his palm. He joked as he walked toward the cargo ship, Do not be too nervous, relax and think about something else. For example, I lent you that charm. If you're going to use it, remember to make one for me in return. Of course, you can wait till next month, when you receive a new quota of materials before you do so. This he really is the experienced old Neil. Klein placed the charm into his left pocket, reached into his holster, took out his revolver, and adjusted the hammer and drum. I don't feel that nervous anymore. He had a gun in one hand and his cane in the other. He made his way up the steps with old Neil and boarded the cargo ship. This cargo ship had obvious signs of age. Although it was powered by steam and had a chimney, it retained its past fixtures such as its mast and sails. Furthermore, only its surface and some other portions were plated with metal. The remaining sections of the ship were still made of wood. As the sounds of the battle intensified, Klein and old Neil suddenly heard a loud noise amid the din while searching for a way to enter the cabin. The wooden cabin was instantly shattered, its fragments flying everywhere. A figure fell through the hole and crashed onto the side of the ship. Klein didn't have the luxury of time to evaluate the man's injuries. His gaze was focused on the monster which was charging towards the hole. The monster was over 1.8 meters in height and was wearing a tattered shirt and trouser. Its ankles were covered with dark green scales, and a layer of skin had formed between its fingers and toes, as if they were the webbed limbs of an aquatic creature. It had a head covered in wrinkles, still barely resembling a human. Its scales were coated with a sticky fluid that continuously dripped onto the floor. Sizzle. The sticky dark green liquid corroded the deck slightly, leaving visible marks behind. Swain punched the monster from the side, causing it to stagger 2 steps to the side. Even with the ridiculous muscles Swain had, he was clearly inferior to the monster. Despite having his punches and kicks connect, they were unable to smash through its scales and cause physical harm. Swain was momentarily reduced to a wretched state as he staggered. If not for Swain's astounding sense of balance and the efforts of the other mandated punishers to shoot and suppress the monster, Klein suspected that this blue-eyed elder would have been beaten to death by the monster. Thud, thud, thud. Swain took multiple steps back, then advanced once again, like a moth to a flame. But Klein could sense that he was accumulating something, waiting for something. Swain was sent to retreat, his body obscuring another mandated punisher's field of vision. The monster took this chance to charge towards the opening. It wanted to escape the ship and jump into the Tussock River. Looking at the wrinkled, sticky head of the monster, Klein lifted his right hand and pulled the trigger. Bang! The silver demon hunting bullet hit the monster's body just as he predicted. But it had only hit its scales and failed to fully penetrate its body. The monster let out a piercing shriek before it exerted strength with its feet and pounced at Klein. When a stinking fishy smell hit him, Klein suddenly hunched down and rolled to the side. Clang! He felt the ship shake as fragments had hit it as well. At the same time, he heard an old but deep voice recite an incantation in ancient Hermes, Evernight. Klein rolled over 2 more times. He couldn't care about his cane as he lifted his head and revolver in a fluster. All he saw was old Neil tossing out his charm calmly, despite being incredibly close to the monster. The piece of silver was instantly swallowed by a dark red flame and released the faint sound of an explosion. A deep, serene power spread forth. The monster, who had almost destroyed the side of the shop, rocked. Its movements became sluggish. Swain charged out from the cabin. He approached the creature and pulled back his arm, hitting the monster like a jackhammer. His punches connected with the head of the monster. But he could barely inflict a wound, let alone cause any fatal damage. But Klein could sense that whatever the blue-eyed elder was accumulating had finally reached its peak. Boom! The monster seemed to recover. It flailed its arm and made Swain take 5 steps back in retreat. Each of his steps caused cracks to form on the deck. Seeing that the monster was about to turn around and jump off the cargo ship, Klein took out the slumber charm from his pocket in a hurry. After which, he expertly recited the phrase in ancient Hermes, Evernight. Suddenly, Klein felt the silver charm in his hand turn ice cold, as if it was made from snow. He didn't think too much about it. He injected his spirituality into the charm, then pulled his arm back before throwing it forward, sending the charm flying towards the monster. Meanwhile, the fish and human monster had jumped into the air. The dark red flames illuminated the surrounding darkness, and the faint explosion was like a prelude to a slumber as it quickly radiated outwards. The monster fell onto the dock, squirming into a ball. It was temporarily in a half-asleep state. Klein was just about to rush to the side of the boat and shoot at the monster's head when he suddenly saw Swain charge out and jump over, his navy uniform already long gone. He changed his posture in the air, his muscles tightening. Using his spiritual perception, Klein could feel something that had been suppressed erupt. Swain descended from the sky and slammed into the body of the monster. He then straightened his back and landed a heavy fist on the head of the monster. Crack! The monster's skull shattered into pieces. Dark red blood and greyish brain matter laced with the green sticky liquid splattered all over the ground. This is one of the abilities of the folk of rage, Klein muttered to himself as he stood near the broken side of the ship. Old Neil held his left arm and leaned over to look at what had happened below. At that moment, Swain was standing straight. He stared at the monster under his feet that had just lost its life. He took out a metal flask and opened the lid. He drank a good half of the liquor before tilting the flask, pouring the remaining liquor onto the monster. After finishing this, Swain looked like he had aged considerably, his back hunching a little. Old Neil sighed as he looked at the scene below. He whispered to Klein, "I know this mandated punisher who lost control." He had followed Swain for almost 30 years, once clearing water ghosts who had been killing people on the shore. He also captured evil beyonders who were trying to escape through the Tussock River. He didn't continue, but Klein understood what he wanted to say. A guard who had made many contributions and killed countless monsters ended up becoming a monster himself. This was not an isolated incident. It was a possible outcome that many members of the Nitorks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind would one day face. Hi, Tannen here, the translator of them. I've included the author's notes before the book went premium in China below. It has been 2 months since Lung was first released, and it's time to go premium. In the past 2 months, I nearly didn't say much in the author's notes or interact much with you. The main reason is that I'm increasingly convinced that the best communication between author and reader is inside the novel. I will write whatever I wish to express or describe inside the story, so there's no need for me to say anything else. Yes, back to them. I probably had this idea to find the joy from first coming into contact with web novels. That feeling of, wow, there can be such a world, or there's actually such a magical world. Back then, every book presented a variety of different and interesting worlds. It always exposed me to more, making me unable to extricate myself from those worlds as they expand my imagination. Of course, it has to do with me having little exposure to similar novels. Therefore, when I felt that I had made sufficient preparations in creating the framework of a relatively new world and an interesting and amazing system, I began this book with uneasiness and courage. With acting, 22 pathways as core, with 220 potions and 220 jobs, this is a part that I hope the most that can interest everyone. In addition, it mixes in Cthulhu mythos, SCP Foundation elements, and the vibes of the first Industrial Revolution's era and a steampunk world. I read many books and created many settings, but I know that what's most important is to carefully tell this story. I took my time to tell it, which is why the first volume's pace is extremely slow. It's also why chapters consisting of more than 410,000 plus Chinese characters, 255,000 plus English words were released free. I wanted to honestly develop the plot and accentuate the characters to portray the world. I didn't seek so-called climaxes and presented the scenes in my heart to you. Thanks to Mom's writing, I was able to have standards that can attract others when writing slice-of-life parts, allowing me to be equipped with the ability and writing flair needed to honestly tell a story. In the past, I learned how to express, or it could be said that every writer or author can innately express. But now, I feel that I've begun restraining myself. Many a time, I would not describe it, but use actions, speech and expressions to present the emotions, without any inner monologue. I might not even use actions, speech, and expression, just describing it coldly, like the chapter with the female lead workers. It's also my wish to maintain standards at critical points in them. This book's various frameworks are probably the most complete one among all my books. Look forward to how I handle everything. This is my thoughts and attempts for this book. I hope everyone will like it. I wish you can support me by paying for premium chapters. After all, I still need to make a livelihood. I still need to meet the demands of my wife. I've always been a normal person, and I've never had any doubts to that. At the same time, I'm also a person who's very lazy and have many personality problems. I once thought of organizing my own fan club like other authors, but, it's really frustrating and tiring. Then, there was no more funds. I once thought of having a Weibo to amass some popularity, but, it's really frustrating and tiring. Then, there was no more funds. I've already lost track of the last time I updated on Weibo. I made a public chat account and attempted writing some things, but, it's really frustrating and tiring. Then, there are updates only once in a while. I attempted to hire others to help me run the social media account, but I always find it awkward and embarrassing seeing the content posted by others. So, I stopped it. Phew, I wish to be a mediator for myself. Admit it, you are a lazy person. You are a person who is flawed when it comes to social interactions. You are a thin-skinned person who wants face at the cost of your life. You are a person who doesn't like getting disturbed by various miscellaneous matters. You are just like it is to wash a pig is to waste both water and soap. Perhaps, what I can do well and am willing to do well is to write novels, the depiction of the story in my heart. That is how I reconcile with myself, not to live on awkwardly or force myself to become popular. For the public account, I'll post something when I think of it. If there's nothing, forget it. Well, reconciliation is just an artistic way of saying convincing. The accurate description should be to live in self-abandonment. Asterisk rubs hands nefariously. Asterisk. After this communication, we will have premium chapters for the next update. I'll make my plea here for you to support premium and vote with your power stones. There will be a mass release. Really, I have a stockpile. Well, there will at least be 5. Maybe 6. Chinese Twitter Klein looked at Swain standing before the monster's corpse before looking sideways towards the mandated Punisher who was helping his semi-conscious partner up by the arm. Klein suddenly felt an indescribable sadness. It was almost impossible for members of the Nitorks, mandated Punishers, and the machinery hive mind to be known as heroes. The things they did were never made known to the public, but only hidden in confidential dockets. But the danger and pain they endured were ever so real. Perhaps there would be a day when my enemy will be one of my teammates. Klein sighed silently. He felt the heavy weight that all Nitorks, mandated Punishers, and machinery hive mind carried. At that moment, old Neil let out a sigh. Let's go, let's not disturb them. Okay, Klein picked up his cane. Just as he widened his stride, he suddenly noticed that old Neil was still holding his left hand. He asked, concerned, "Are you hurt?" Old Neil chuckled briefly before saying, "I got stabbed by one of the shrapnel earlier. If I was still young, I definitely would have been able to dodge it. Luckily, it's just a small cut." He moved his right hand slightly to let Klein see the tiny wound that was still lightly bleeding on the back of his left hand. After he confirmed that it wasn't a big issue, Klein walked off along the gangway as he sighed. "Mr. Neil, you're much calmer than I imagined." Despite being less than 2 meters away from the monster, you could still chant the incantation calmly and use the charm. Although the rampaging mandated Punisher had leaped towards Klein in the form of a monster, old Neil was physically very close to him the entire time. Old Neil chucked at the compliment. "I'm an experienced Nitork. Among the dangerous things that I've done, what happened just now isn't even in my top 10. Once, when I was patrolling Raphael Cemetery with Gunn, I had no idea that a corpse had turned into a zombie and left its tomb to lie in ambush in the shadows of the trees. I passed by without noticing it at all since I was looking for some hidden spot. Hey, you know what I mean. In the end, he leapt onto my back and seized my throat." Klein felt gripped by terror when he heard the recollection as he voiced out his guess. "And under such a situation, you were still calm enough to use a charm? Or did you use some spell that the mystery prior could cast quickly?" Old Neil stole a glance at him and chortled. "No, Gunn managed to drag that zombie into a slumber in time. I'm telling you this story to tell you that, as an Nitork, you not only have to believe in yourself, you also have to trust your teammates too." Klein fell silent for a few seconds. Then, he replied both sincerely and jokingly, "Mr. Neil, you are so wise today." Old Neil did a tiny hop and found his footing on the pier. He replied in disdain, "That's because you only get to know the most trivial side of me usually." The two of them left the harbor and walked towards Evil Dragon Bar. Klein put away his revolver, set his cane aside, and took off his jacket. Under the light of the gas street lamp, he started checking if there was any damage to his jacket. How lucky. There are only a few splinters and a patch that got dirtied. He removed the splinters and roughly patted the dust away. Then, he put it back on. Old Neil looked at him with a smile and mimicked his tone by adding leisurely, "What a pity. There's no way to claim compensation." Klein was temporarily at a loss for words. "I'm not such a person," he emphasized in his heart. As the public carriage arrived, Klein took out his silver vine-leaf pocket watch and flipped it open to check the time. "If there's nothing else, I have to head home," he turned to tell Old Neil. Old Neil nodded slightly and said, "Enjoy your dinner at home. You don't need to think about the slumber charm. I'll get Swain to compensate me. He's a rich man after all. Of course, I won't go today. I have to consider his mood." Klein opened his mouth, but in the end, he only said, "Thank you for your generosity." He boarded the carriage quickly and returned to Daffodil Street. It was already past 7 in the evening, and the sky had already grown dark. Klein took out his keys to open the door and saw Melissa taking off her fishnet hat and setting it on the clothes rack. He smiled and did small talk. "You just got back." Then, his mixed emotions suddenly vanished, and he felt relaxed and warm. "There was a practical lesson in school today," Melissa explained seriously. Klein sniffed and smelled the fragrance of food. He was stunned and asked subconsciously, "Then, who's cooking dinner?" The moment he finished his sentence, both of them answered the question in unison, "Benson." Their tone had a hint of alarm. Benson, who had heard their conversation, walked out of the kitchen. While wiping his hands on an apron, he said, "Do you have no confidence in my cooking? I remember that before Melissa learned how to cook, you two would wait for me to come home and watch me cook with anticipation. Actually, cooking is so easy. You want potato beef stew, put in the beef first, then the potatoes, then add some seasoning." Klein and Melissa exchanged glances and remained silent. Putting aside his cane and took off his hat, Klein turned around and smiled. "I think it's time to hire a maidservant. It's very unhealthy to not eat dinner on time. But I don't want to have a stranger next to us when we chat." "That'll make me feel uncomfortable," Melissa said, subconsciously finding an excuse to object. Klein spoke with a smile as he took off his jacket. "I don't mind." Just then, his expression froze, and he stopped what he was doing. "I almost took off my jacket. I still have a revolver at my armpit." He cleared his throat and pretended nothing happened. "Don't mind her. When we get home, we can let the maidservant rest in her room. I doubt any maidservant would dislike resting. We must find a maidservant who's willing to learn how to cook." He didn't want to endure the torture of a cuisine that left him guessing in the future. Benson stood at the kitchen and nodded in agreement. "When we have time, we can go over to Tingen Family Servant Assistance Association. They have a great deal of experience and many resources in this field." "All right, it's decided then." Klein ignored Melissa's unwilling look. Backland, Empress Borough, Viscount Blain's residence. Audrey Hall left the party with her personal maid, Annie. They came to the second floor and entered the bedroom that the Viscount had prepared. She took off her glamorous dress and her lightweight dancing heels slowly with Annie's assistance. She then put on a black hooded robe that she had prepared ahead of time. Pulling out the hood, Audrey stood before the full mirror and examined herself. She saw that more than half her face was covered by the shadow of her hood, and only her beautiful lips were clearly exposed. Long black robe, face hidden by shadows, a mysterious feeling. This is something I've been dreaming of wearing all this time. Audrey thought to herself happily. Worried, she added a blue boat-shaped soft hat under her hood. With the fine checkered fishnet drooping down, her facial features became even more indiscernible. Not bad, that's it. Audrey stuffed her feet into leather ankle boots, looked to the side, and told Annie, "Wait for me here. No matter who comes, do not open the door." Annie looked at her helplessly and said, "But you have to make sure that your trip doesn't take more than an hour. You should trust me. I have kept my promise every single time in the past." Audrey smiled and leaned in towards her personal maidservant. She hugged her and kissed her cheek as etiquette demanded. Then, she walked quickly and pulled up her hood. Turning around, she exited the bedroom through a secret door. She walked all the way down and came to the side door of the Viscount's residence, where she saw that there was already a carriage waiting there. Blaine stood amidst the shadows as he glanced at Audrey and complimented sincerely, "By dressing up like this, you are really, like the description Emperor Russell often used, very cool." "Thank you." Audrey pulled up an imaginary skirt and curtsied elegantly. The two of them got into the carriage and left the villa. They arrived at a house about 10 minutes away. Outside the house, Audrey saw Apprentice Force Wall and her friend, Tribunal Xio de Regia, whom she had been seeing recently. Force's slightly wavy brown hair and her light blue eyes showed a natural laziness. She pointed at Xio de Regia next to her and said, "She's an excellent persuader, capable of helping you get things that you want." Xio de Regia was slightly shorter, about 150 centimeters at most. Her facial features were soft, but she seemed pretty young and immature. Although her shoulder-length blonde hair was messy and unkempt, and she was in a traditional night training suit, she carried an indescribable look of dignity and a convincing charm. Audrey had met her a few times. She smiled faintly and greeted, "Miss Xio, can I trust you?" "You don't have to worry at all." Xio de Regia smiled and gestured with her hand. Just as she walked to follow Audrey and Viscount Blaine, they heard a sudden thud. Audrey looked towards the source of the sound and saw that a triangular blade coruscating with a cold glimmer had fallen beside Xio de Richer's leg. Audrey and Xio de Richer exchanged looks, simultaneously at a loss for words. After nearly 20 seconds, Xio de Richer quickly squatted and picked up the triangular blade and hid it on her body. We have to prevent the occurrence of an accident. Some people lack rationality, and they aren't convinced easily, Xio de Richer explained seriously. Audrey nodded and replied with a clear voice, I believe you. These are tools to convince those B***stards to talk to us calmly, Force added, looking sideways at the grass plains. The quartet didn't continue conversing and walked a few steps forward. They knocked on the wooden door with 3 long and 2 short knocks. The door squeaked and opened. Slowly, using her spectator state, Audrey looked into the house that had many people sitting around randomly. They employed various methods such as hoods or masks to conceal their looks. Some didn't even bother and exposed their faces openly. Almost instantly, Audrey noticed a black-robed man on a single-seat sofa. That man wore a hood too, hiding his looks under a shadow. He looked at all the guests in silence, giving people a feeling that he was somehow in a commanding position. He is very confident, but his gaze is very disgusting. His gaze moved up and down my body like 2 slippery tentacles wanting to tear off my clothes. Audrey's senses were sharp. She carefully observed and made a judgment calmly, but she nearly had goosebumps. Force introduced him. That's Mr. A powerful Beyonder, the leader of this secret gathering.